Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of our December Mid-Atlantic Council meeting. Now that we have our picture taken, look forward to seeing us on Time Magazine for the Council of the Year. I'm sure we're nominated. Absolutely. Let's get started with Atlantic surf clam and ocean quahog species separation requirements amendment final action. The Council will review outcomes of the Atlantic surf clam and ocean quahog species separation requirement implementation issues workshop, which was held on 2024 in October. Staff recommendations and consider identifying a preferred alternative and taking final action on the species separation requirements amendment. Jose is pinch hitting today for Jessica, who is stuck in jury duty. So I'm sure she'd rather be here, but she's in Baltimore. So Jose, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Well, that's what she says. But anyways, Jessica put this presentation together, help a little bit, but you will see that how nice it is. So thank you for that introduction to what we're doing today. So basically, I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the history of this action, what we have done recently. Then I'm going to spend quite a bit of time reviewing the October 2024 workshop report, and then we'll go into staff recommendations. And for you today, as the West indicated, you're going to consider preferred alternative and then take final action for this amendment. So this action is needed due to the increased frequency of mixed catches in the surf clam and ocean quahog vessels. This is an issue that was raised to the council back in 2018 by the industry, and they indicated that this was something that we needed to work on because this was creating economic and logistical challenges for the industry. And to be honest, it's something that I think that is probably going to continue to get worse as time progresses because of how these animals are moving. So currently, mixed clams are being caught on single species declared trips, but the cages are tagged as single species, either surf clam or ocean quahog. So in this fishery, when you go out fishing for clams, you can only bring into catch in a trip or put in the cages either surf clams or ocean quahogs, and you have to attach a tag that says which species you're targeting or catching. But now, due to the increase in mixing, that's not the case for many trips. Non-target clams discarded at sea or landing in the clam cages are being landed. So that means that you have a surf clam cage, and there might be an ocean quahog in that cage, and that's not being counted. And the discards are not being reported on VTR or dealer reports as well. So the action is needed to ensure that we have an adequate catch monitoring, ITQ allocation tracking, and enforceability of the measures that we have for both ITQ fisheries. So back in May of this year, we had public hearings for that we took out to gather input from the public regarding this issue. That's the cover page from that public hearing document. We had a total of 6 alternatives. There was 1 action alternative plus 5, one no action alternative plus 5 action alternative. And those alternatives were, the impacts of those alternatives were assessed and highlighted to address 4 main challenges, which were catch monitoring and verification, allocation tracking, enforceability, and cost. These are the 6 alternatives that were presented in that public hearing document. I'm not going to read all this, but you can just briefly take a look at it. But this alternative mainly focus on either sorting everything at sea or everything on land to ensure that the catch are accounted for, so that we have a good understanding of the landings and discards of this species. Alternative 5 here for reference is the one that require full retention of both clam species on board fishing vessels. Sorting will occur at the dealer, and catch monitors are also required at the dealer. So in June, we had a council meeting where public input was presented to the council. So the council reviewed the public input, and you consider taking final action at that meeting. The council voted to postpone selecting preferred alternative 5 and taking final action in December of this year, which is this council meeting. And the delay in taking final action was intended to allow for time to have a workshop to discuss implementation approaches for alternative 5. So that was the idea regarding that delay in taking action. In October of this year, we had a workshop a couple of months after that pause, and the summary report from that workshop is in your briefing book materials. So we had a workshop that a day and a half workshop. We invited 35 participants. We had council members and council staff there. We have NOAA fisheries staff, and we had clam industry members, amongst others. And these individuals were invited because they have a specific expertise relevant to this issue and the considerations for alternative 5. In addition to the 35 participants, we had like about 15 other individuals that attended either in person or via webinar. The 35 participants here that were invited to come to this meeting, they were all in person. Patrick Phil from Consensus Building Institute facilitated the workshop, did a great job. So this was something that we appreciated. So kind of like to contextualize the workshop, there were some implementation goals that were developed and that were shared with the workshop participants ahead of time, and they're presented in Appendix B of the summary report. Implementation goal 1 was to accurately catch, accurate catch estimates and verification of the catch. The second one was to allow for accurate allocation tracking to support the integrity and accuracy of the IFQ system. The third one was to have enforceable measures. And the last one was to manage costs, affordability, and implementation timelines. So there's a few paragraphs or so under each one of these goals in the workshop report. But to be honest, by just looking at these topics, you get a pretty good idea of what the workshop participants were concentrating on or looking at. So an outcome of this 2-day workshop was that some key points of agreement were developed. These points of agreement were carried into the draft alternative that I'm going to be talking in a little bit. And there are 13 points of agreement. I'm briefly going to go over this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time in some of them because they're really self-explanatory. The first one, the goal is to fully account for harvest, landings, and discards, and consistency among vessels, observer, dealer reporting, and monitoring. So we want to have consistency so we get good numbers regarding landings and discard. The second one was full retention by the fleet to dock is not required. This was a big issue with the original alternative. So that was taken off the table. That was a point of agreement. The third one was a double tagging with explicit tag ratios will be removed from the alternative. And if you remember, under the original alternative, we talked about like if you were gonna bring a cage of surf clams, you needed one tag of surf clams plus half a tag of ocean quahawks. And if you were doing, or if you're bringing a cage of ocean quahawks, it will be the other way around. So this was an issue to the industry. So this has been taken off the table of the alternative as well. Discard reporting by fleet is as required by law with the vessel trip report must be done. Currently, the industry is not reporting discards on their VTR. However, they show willingness to comply with that specific regulation. The fifth one is additional at sea observers desire to ensure a more accurate stock assessment. Currently, information that comes from observers, discard information is not using in the stock assessment because the CVs associated with those numbers are very high, and only we have like about 40 days at sea, less than 1% coverage for observer coverage. So that information is deficient and is not being used in the stock assessment. The industry or the workshop participants also indicated that an increase in observer was something that was desired to get a better handle on the discards. Declared trip is going to be a surf clam only, ocean quahawk only, or a mixed trip. So that means that we will allow for both species to be landed for in the same trip. For individuals that are not landing both the species, they can just declare a single species trip. So this means that now we will, I'm going to repeat myself, allow to land surf clam only, ocean quahawk only, or both species from the same vessel trip. Number A is that mixed cages are allowed to be landed. There is a note here indicating that law enforcement had some concerns regarding this specific issue. Because they wouldn't be able to count clams. However, law enforcement also understands that for some vessels is very difficult to separate the animals on the vessel, so they understand this specific point, and you know, even though they have concerns, they understand why this is being put forward. Databases will need to be adjusted to include mixed-use transfer tags, and OLE will have access to those. So, you know, law enforcement will have to kind of access this information to ascertain that whatever mixed use or transfer tag is being used, those individuals, they have allocations for both species. Number 10, the tagging program will need to be modified to work within the ITQ program to allow for landings of mixed cages. There will be a need for a plant site monitoring that will be needed, but not at a 100% coverage. Number 12 is that staff will review the program after 1 year, and the council can consider next steps. The idea here is that once we implement this, if this program is implemented after 1 year, you can just take a look at it, see how things are working, and if there are some efficiencies that we can take advantage of, then the council will have an opportunity to talk about that and take action if they wish to do so in the future. And the last one is in the interim, in the meantime, an exempted fishing permit could be something very useful to kind of look at work on discards protocol on the boats, or short side monitoring protocols for specific plants. And this will give individuals that are involved in that EFP an exemption, and it will allow them to land mixed cages. So if the council were to approve this to move forward, it will take some time for implementation. But in the meantime, the fishing industry can be working on these different issues, and they can land mixed cages without being penalized. So these are other important points and topics that we also kept in mind when during the workshop. Some of these are a little bit repetitive for some of the things that I said. So, but the bottom line is that we took into consideration the goals and the implementation goals, the key points that came out of the that were developed by the workshop participants, plus all these other points, and we used that to draft an alternative, a modification of alternative 5 to make it hopefully workable. So I'm going to go now and talk about some of these modifications. And the way I'm going to do this is, like, on the left, you have the current alternative, which is full retention of both Atlantic surf clam and ocean quahog, and sorting at the dealer with catch monitors. On the right, you have the draft alternative text that was developed, again, based on key points and workshop discussion. You're going to note that on the right side, there is some text, there is some language that is underlined. And what that means, that's the new stuff that is being added. That's the new language, that is text that is being added to the alternative, the modification, to capture the things that came out of the workshop. So under the original alternative, you see on the left that we have that we needed to implement a new catch monitor program and other challenges and regulations. And then on the right, you see that the draft alternative, those two things are still there, but there are new additions. And I'm going to go over those new additions from now until the end of this draft report alternative. The IDQ program changes made via this alternative will be reviewed by council after 1 year of full implementation. I just told you the logic behind that. Alternative might include additional cost recovery program recoverable costs. These are costs that are associated with observer and monitoring, the monitoring program, and we'll talk about that in detail in a bit. A modification of cost recovery program might be needed, which means that for example, we might need to collect the money via dealer versus allocation holders. So that was the new text that was added to this alternative. A VMS declaration process modified under the surf clam trip, ocean quahog trips, or mixed trip will be needed. So for a mixed trip, then you have to declare, you declare a mixed trip if you're landing both species. And if you're landing a single species, then you just declare that. The vessels declaring a single species trip, they will still be subject to the current single species regulations that we have in place. The discards at sea will be accounted for via a combination of increased observer coverage and self-reported discards on EVTRs. So again, the observer discards, those are the ones that kind of are used, those are the ones that could be used for directly in the stock assessment. The EVTR discards, those are discards that are required by law. But something else is that if we were to properly collect that information, you can use that to cross-check what is being, the discard values from the observer. So now we have two different things that we can compare, and that will be highly beneficial. And one of the most important points from this slide is that full retention of both species is not required, as it is under the current alternative 5. Again, discards required to be reported on EVTRs. The industry should voluntarily develop protocols to develop accurate discard estimates during fishing operations. Industry has indicated that they were never told how to account for discards, how to count those clams. So the industry could work with the service in developing those protocols that can be implemented industry-wide. It was recommended that those approaches to count discards be similar to those utilized in the observer program to increase potential utility of this information. Observer coverage increased in year 1 from the current levels to cover 5% of all trips to quantify at sea discards for surf clams and ocean quahog to achieve a 30% CV. This 5% is a recommendation from the Northeast Fishery Science Center. This will be in the first year. As I indicated before, the current levels are less than 1%. And this will be adjusted in year 2 and thereafter to achieve at least a 30% CV on discard estimates going forward. Because you actually need that kind of confidence level on these discards for them to be used in the stock assessment. This slide here, you can see that the text is almost identical. But at the dealer, each mixed trip will be separated, sorted separately with all target and non-target clam species volumes sorted and reported on the dealer reports. And then using the catch monitoring plan to be developed and approved by NOAA Fisheries. And then obviously the catch monitors will be verifying. You can use that information from the catch monitors to compare to what is being reported by the dealers. Equipment inspection and standardization or other approaches will be considered during the developing of the catch monitoring plan. Remember, this catch monitoring plans, this is something that is going to develop by, instead of having a standardized plan that is going to be the same across all processing plants, each individual processing plant, because they all have different needs and different infrastructure and things like that, then they're going to work closely with the service to develop a plan that is workable for their infrastructure. And then we need to ensure that measurement of volumes of bushels of clams is consistent and is standardized across facilities receiving and sorting cages. The catch monitor will be used to confirm that the ITQ landings are accurately sorted and reported, and the methods are being followed under the catch monitoring plan for that specific facility. They will produce a separate catch report that is going to be used to verify the dealer reports. As I said before, all catch monitors will receive appropriate training and be certified by NOAA Fisheries. The catch monitors will be deployed to dealers that are first receiver of surf clam and ocean quahog cages. So in this fishery, sometimes the clams come directly to the dealer, but sometimes they're landed in a port and then they have to be transported to a processing plant, sometimes large distances across state lines and whatnot. So the monitor will have to go to that facility that is going to be receiving those clams. The catch monitor's primary duties will be compliance with new requirements and include monitoring and verification of the sorting of clams and ocean quahog relative to that catch monitoring plan for that facility. Verification of dealer reporting. You can use that information to cross-check what the dealers are reporting. Catch monitors will have unobstructed access to catch sorting, processing, catch counting, and the development of any catch disposition records as noted in the catch monitoring plan for the facility. And the last slide regarding this point is catch monitors will be deployed randomly with target coverage rate of 50% of the mixed trips. We started talking at the workshop at the 100% of all trips. Obviously, that was something that was not really kind of feasible because it was excessively very, very costly. So we said, okay, let's go down to 50% of all the trips. But at the end of the day, we're concentrating only on the mixed trips. Pre-landings vessels notification system at sea or other approach will be needed to randomly and unexpectedly deploy monitors to dealers' facilities that are first receivers. So you need to call. You need to say if you have a surf climb only trip or a mixed trip, and then the service will deploy monitors when randomly and when needed. Notifications will need to indicate both ports of landing and the final dealer destination. And this is related to what I just talked about, that sometimes these animals have to be transported large distances. So these are the draft alternative text that was developed, again, using all the input that was we obtained during the workshop. We didn't have a specific, we had some numbers regarding potential costs of monitors in the public hearing document, but we were able to work with the Northeast Fisheries Science Center to get more detailed information regarding those costs. And Cameron Day, Dan Hennon, and Sarah Weeks were very helpful. They're the ones that develop all this cost information that I'm going to be talking about. So staff is very thankful to them and their input. So for their server program, cost predictions for this program is what you're looking at right here. On the left column, you have a clam trip coverage level that goes from, as an example, from 2.5% to 10%. Then on the second column, you have trips, the number of trips and the days at sea. And the number of trips, this is based on 2,000 trips for both species combined. So 5% of 2,000 will be 100. And then the number that is next to like on the 5%, you have 100, and then you have another number that is the days at sea. That was estimated at an average of 3 days at sea per trip. And then on the last column, you have the total cost combined for observers. And this includes both, and you cannot forget this, at sea and shoreside. It's not just the cost of the monitor at sea, but also the work that needs to be done at shoreside, data entry, management, and some of those other things. So the total cost was calculated by multiplying the at sea days by 2,100. And I think that the cost, if I recall properly, the cost of a monitor is $1,400 for when they go on the boat, and the rest is all the other costs that is shoreside cost. So the center indicated that a 5% coverage level the first year will be good because it will probably allow us to achieve that 30% CV. With that being said, and I will talk a little bit more about this later, but we already have some observers that are being deployed in this fishery. As I said before, it's less than 1% of coverage level. So I think that last year, well, I don't think so. I know last year it was 40 at sea days. So in reality, the overall cost of having a 5% level trip coverage will be less than $630,000 because already some of that is being paid by the National Marine Fisheries Service. So this one here, this slide is a preliminary cost analysis of the shoreside monitoring program. So on the top, you have some values that are like values that tell you what different components of the program costs are. The salary for a monitor is between $400 and $440. Travel costs for a monitor to go to a facility, they will get paid the standard 67 cents per mile. As an example here, if you go from New Bedford to Gloucester, it will be about $130. There's also a training component for the monitor from $400 to $440. And then you will need a project manager. And that will be about $118,000 to $129,000. And that is for the yearly salary, benefits, overheads, and all those different things. So those are the values that $440 value there on the first column. That's the one that it was carried to the second set of numbers. So on the second set of numbers, we have the catch monitor cost protection, and this is like how much you pay when these people go to a processing plant. So this was based on a dockside monitoring component of a program that was recently used to verify full retention of allocated ground fish. So the individuals that put these numbers together for us, they use that as a template. So the way to read this, on the first column, you have the number of monitor events, and you can see that they go from 250 to 1,000. The cost per monitor event is $400 to $440. And then the total cost is on the last column of this second part of this graph figure. And for 250 monitor events, the total cost is between $100,000 and $110,000. And for 1,000 monitor events, it's between $400,000 and $440,000. Why do we have all these different numbers here? Because we don't really know how many trips are mixed trips. We don't have that information. So this is kind of like to give you an understanding of what those costs could be given different monitoring events. And then on the last portion of this figure, you have on the pilot year, on the first year, you will have to have a project supervisor that will need to go around to be sure that things are working properly. And there will be some travel that will be associated with that work. And the annual cost will be between $19,000 and $21,500. So this is the preliminary analysis of the cost estimates for that shoreside monitoring. So as I said before, those number of monitor events were based on 2,000 trips per year, all those different levels. But again, we don't know what proportion of the trips are mixed. So that final number will depend on the number of mixed trips. So as an example, and again, we're basing this on 2,000 trips per year for both the species. So, for example, if 1,000 trips are mixed, then 50% coverage of those trips will be about 500 monitor events. And if 500 trips are mixed, then 50% of that coverage will be 250 monitor events. So probably going to be, I mean, it's hard to tell, but I think there's going to be a number between these two most likely. So for the pilot year, for the first year, if we assume 500 monitor events, then the preliminary cost for the shoreside monitoring program will be between $337,000 and $371,000. So that includes, I'm going to go back, all these different things: project manager, total cost for field work, and the project supervisor annual cost for the first year. So regarding cost recovery, Magnuson allows the councils to, or the service to recover up to 3% of the total ex-vessel value. Right now, for this fishery, the cost recovery is about 0.2%. Last time that this cost recovery letters were sent out, the estimate came at about $114,000 out of a $49 million ex-vessel value. Now, the observer cost prediction that I showed you earlier of $630,000 for that 5% level. But remember that in reality, is a little bit less because we already have some SBRM coverage, okay? Now, the new cost, the new shoreside cost prediction, that is between $337,000 and $370,000. So if you were to add the observer cost at 5% plus the shoreside cost, you come out to $967,000 to $1 million. This will represent about 2% cost recovery level. So still less than the 3% that is where the service is allowed to recover from the industry. But again, the value will probably be less than this because we already have some coverage for observers. So if you were to decrease, take that away, the total value will be between $800,000 and $900,000 if you were to subtract what we're already doing in the observer, and that will be about 1.6% cost recovery. So the staff recommendations are that based on the draft text alternative, based on points and workshop discussion that we just talked about, to select revised alternative 5 as described in the staff memo that it says increase observer coverage and self-reported discards, mixed trips sorted at the dealer with NOAA catch monitors as the preferred alternative, and to submit the document to NOAA Fisheries. So for today, hopefully you can identify a preferred alternative and consider final action and submission to the service. As a reminder, if no action is taken, the current single species regulations are unchanged. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Jose. Discussion around the table? Any questions around the table? Mike Penny.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Jose, for the presentation. Just I wanted a couple of clarifications. So when you described the intention for the catch monitoring plans, if I'm interpreting correctly, those would be developed typically for these sorts of regulatory programs where we more directly control the actions of the vessels that we permit. But it seems like in this case, we would be imposing a requirement on the dealers of first receipt of the product to develop catch monitoring plans and submit those to us for review. Is that correct? And I have a follow-up.
So the idea, I think that the idea during the workshop was that the processing plants will work with the National Marine Fisheries Service to develop those monitoring plans for specific facilities.
Well, work with us is different. We need to require, so thinking about how we would write a regulation, the way I'm envisioning this, if I'm interpreting it correctly, is that we would tell dealers that if they want to be authorized to receive mixed trips, they would need to work with us to prepare and submit a catch monitoring plan. Let me know if I've got this wrong. And then we would review those catch monitoring plans according to what's designed in the amendment. And when we approve a catch monitoring plan, then we would then say that dealer processor is authorized to receive mixed trips. And we would inform the vessels that they are then authorized to land mixed trips at those approved dealers. And the more dealers that submit and get approved catch monitoring plans, then the more dealers would be authorized to receive mixed trips. And if a vessel is landing that they declare on the BMS a single species trip, then they would be available to land at a non-authorized dealer. Is that, I have that basically correct?
Yes, it is. So yes, you're correct. So one of the things that I just want to say again is like during the workshop, the idea of having also this exempted fishing permits was to allow the industry to work with researchers under an accepted fishing permit from the service to not only develop protocols to assess discards, but also to work to an extent on how to develop those catch monitor programs for the plants. And yes, you're correct. So you could have a specific facility that is going to tell you, okay, we're getting a mixed trip tomorrow or sometime this week. And then obviously you're going to use a process to develop those monitors. You may send a monitor there or you may not, but because they have a mixed trip, that is a possibility. But the same plan, the next week could just get only surf clam trips. And at that point, you will not develop, you will not send a monitor because there is no need for that. Yeah.
Thanks. And I guess I want to be clear that we're talking about two related but independent things, right? I mean, as I understand the proposed revised alternative 5, one component of the amendment would be catch monitoring plans developed by the dealers, those who are receiving clams and processing them. Another component would be the catch monitoring program, catch monitors that go randomly to dealers and validate that the data that are being collected and provided through the catch monitoring plan for mixed trips is in fact accurate and complete, right? So they're related, but they're independent. So the first piece of our implementation of this amendment, as I understand it might be proposed, would be to establish protocols for dealers that want to receive mixed trips to develop and submit and have approved catch monitoring plans. Then they go on an authorized list. And then that authorized list is also then serves as sort of the universe of dealers that we may send catch monitors to on as trips are calling in, vessels are calling in through their VMS or whatever, saying, I'm about to land, at this dealer, and we would decide randomly if we're going to send a catch monitor there to meet the trip. So basically,
yes. And one and perhaps Doc Potts can help me with this, but I think that from my perspective, and perhaps I'm misunderstanding some of the outcomes from the workshop, but I thought at the workshop we said, the service will work with the processing plans to develop the catch monitors. But perhaps what was meant to say is that the processing plan develops the plan and then is approved by the service. So I'm not, there's a fine difference there. In my view, it was something that everybody was going to work together. But either way, I think that it will be fine if the plan develops the monitoring plan and then the service approve that. But I don't know, perhaps Doc Potts might be able to help.
Well, maybe Doug has some other ideas, but I think what I'm trying to get at is that for us to approve and implement the amendment as the council may submit it, it can't just be an open-ended thing like, the agency should work. The amendment can't say the agency should work to develop some sort of plan, right? Mm-hmm. It's got to be more specific than that. Mm-hmm. And I think as long as it's clear sort of the roles and responsibilities, we will certainly work with the interested dealers, much like we do. Probably the closest analogy is the at-sea monitoring plans that groundfish sectors have. We work very closely with the sector managers and the sectors, but ultimately they are responsible for submitting their operations plans and having those approved as meeting the criteria that we establish through the regulations. Every sector operations plan is a little bit different because the needs of sectors are different and they have different membership and different protocols. And we work very closely with them in the development, but ultimately they submit a plan, we approve it, then they're authorized.
Yeah, that's correct. And in fact, that specific example that you're talking about came was raised at the workshop. Yeah, when I say work with National Marine Fisheries Service means that you have to approve the plan and be sure that it's workable. So thank you for that.
Anything else, Michelle?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Jose. So I think I also saw the proposal for an exempted fishing permit that was, part of the comment, I think, submitted by Atlantic Capes on behalf of other folks as well. And so I'm just trying to wrap my head around a timeline for when we would anticipate this entire program would be implemented. So I see, the EFP is there for industry to, do exactly as what was recommended by the workshop, develop these protocols for, to sort of work out these different catch monitoring protocols so that we can have a smoother implementation. But I think I'm wondering when we would anticipate, full implementation of this program, the two pieces that, Mr. Penny is noting. I see that the EFP proposal runs through December of next year or until full implementation occurs. But it seems to me like maybe we're looking at least a couple years down the road before the program will be fully up and running. So any thoughts or clarification?
Yeah, that's an important question, and I think that is I think that is a question that probably has multiple answers. But I think that it will depend on what you do today, what the council does today. So if the council wants us to, for example, just replace the existing alternative 5 with the new text and language from this alternative, that will be something that will be very workable, and we can do that relatively fast. And then, I cannot speak on Jessica's behalf, but I don't know what her workload is. But I think that that's something that could be submitted to the service relatively fast. The implementation part, and I don't know if the service can reply to this now because it all depends what's in that document. I think that will take a lot longer because there have to be a lot of work and modifications to the existing system, the tagging system, and we have to come up with ways. The service has to come up with ways to address those issues. Now, having that EFP going at the same time will be very beneficial because the industry can do a lot of work with researchers ahead of time. And by the time that things are implemented, then we'll have probably a better understanding of how things can be done on board the vessels or at the processing plant. I hope I answer your question, but I don't know. I see Mike Pentony. I think that he might have something to say about this, but I think that it from my perspective, I think that it probably a couple of years is something that is reasonable.
Mike Penny.
And I just asked the question because I want to make sure we're setting expectations appropriately with respect to, when a program could be on board. So definitely appreciate that answer and looking forward to Mike.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, following on, I think a couple of years is probably reasonable, but probably also kind of a minimum. Normally for an amendment, we'd be looking at a year process to get the document from the council, do through some review, go through the normal Magnuson Act review and approval process, and get a final rule on the street. For this kind of action, I think that's the start of the implementation process. As we just discussed, once we have a final rule on the street, at that point, we can begin working with dealers to prepare and have them submit for review catch monitoring plans. Once we have those, we're going to need, we need to give the industry a reasonable amount of time to work with us to prepare those and submit them. We also need to then develop and stand up a brand new catch monitoring program to have catch monitors, assigned to and arriving at plants for the catch monitoring aspect of that. That's going to take some time. There's also a bit of a chicken and egg problem that we haven't really discussed yet, which is, Jose presented the cost estimates, and I appreciate that because I want people to understand that this is not an inexpensive proposition. And those cost estimates and the potential increase or the likely increase in cost recovery fees presumes that we have the funding through normal appropriations to set up the program and pay for it for at least the first year before we can then begin to recoup those costs through the cost recovery program. Because the way the cost recovery program operates is we spend money to do the things that are required to support the fishery. And then the next year we assess how much we spent and we determine the cost recovery fees, which we then collect the following year. So in order for us to, not go in the red, we have to have the funding in advance to pay for and set up and run this program for at least 2 years. And then we can begin to recoup those costs. So we may see some delays. We may be fully ready to go, but have some delays because we don't have the appropriations to cover those initial costs. We might need to come back to the council and have a conversation around that. But I also want to make sure that it's clear, as Jose presented, yeah, this is going to substantially increase the cost recovery fees on the industry to support the catch monitoring plan, the proposed observer coverage increase, but also the changes to the way we manage, monitor, and have accounting for the ITQ system.
Mm-hmm.
Jose touched on that. But right now it's fairly straightforward. We allocate cage tags and we count cages. What we're talking about now is a post landing processing of data to determine the catch accounting and the ITQ accounting system. And so that's going to increase our costs. So our normal day-to-day costs for managing the ITQ aspect and the accounting of that is going to increase.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see increased costs, not just for the catch monitoring plan and the observer coverage,
mm-hmm.
but we'll see increased costs for how we manage the ITQ system. So it's going to take us a couple of years to figure all that out. And, we can certainly plan to provide updates as we go through this process to the council with the industry aware so that they can participate and understand where we are. But it's going to take some time.
Jose?
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Mike. Thanks so much for going detailing all the different aspects. And I should have really said at least 2 years. I didn't mean like in 2 years this is going to be done. And if you think about the excessive shares amendment that we did years back, we were just changing components to the way the ITQ system was, how we were counting shares and accumulations and whatnot. And that was a big lift for the agency. It was incredible. And Mike is right. This has a lot of other components that we don't have in place right now. So yeah, at least 2 years. Yeah.
Peter Hughes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. Appreciative of Mike's comments and Michelle's comments pointing out the EFP that's in the documents under correspondence. Another thing I will point out is there's currently a project within the Science Center for Marine Fisheries, SEMFIS, to identify best practices and how to go about doing this. SEMFIS is a little more nimble on their feet, and by the time, depending upon what happens here today, by the time documents are finalized and out on the street from NIMS, SEMFIS may already have documents outlining best practices that have been, vetted through SEMFIS and out somewhere to be vetted some more. When you think about cost recovery, I think about RSA. RSA is a conversation for the future. I don't know how it would work. I don't know anything about that, but maybe that's something that is a discussion in the future. But, I know there are people in the audience that can speak to the project within SEMFIS, and they can speak to the EFP. And like I said, RSA may be something 2 years down the road that we have a discussion about how industry can recover some of those costs they're going to be paying to National Marine Fisheries Service. So I just wanted people to be aware of that. Thank you.
Joe Semino?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the conversation going on and fully understand where Mr. Pentney was trying to lead us. I think, part of what came out in the workshop is just the industry is trying to get to a better reality for the data. And I think as we move forward, especially if the EFP goes through, that we'll get better data as we move forward to get to this complex program. But my question, Jose, is trying to understand the 50% coverage shore side. Are there examples of that in other fisheries? And is that more for biological reasons, or is that more ITQ management?
Sorry, about the shoreside monitoring program?
Yes.
the number of, if I understood your question correctly, you're asking how many monitoring events there will be. We don't know, because we don't know what the ratio, what the proportions of mixed trips are. That's why we have this range here. I don't want to speculate on how many, but right now we have 2,000 trips per year for both fisheries. Some council members or industry members, they might have a better understanding of what proportion of those trips are mixed trips. So no, I don't think there is an example of monitoring events in another fishery where you're landing mixed trips. I'm not. I don't know if I answered your question or not.
No, and I apologize. So maybe if we go back to, there's a slide that shows 1,000 trips, 50% coverage would be X, or if it was 500 trips, 50% coverage. So my question is about that proportion of coverage that need to happen shoreside.
Mike Bentley.
Thanks. And I don't have a specific answer because I wasn't part of the conversation, but I'm just trying to draw some comparisons in my mind. I think, Joe, to your question, there was initially sort of thought like, well, if we want to be sure we have really good, accurate data to account, the ITQ allocations, we should have catch monitors shoreside monitors at 100% of trips. It's like, well, maybe that's not necessary. So I think it was back down to 50%. I think in some respects, this is, again, sort of drawing an analogy to the groundfish fishery and electronic monitoring. When we started the program, we set the review of the tapes at 50% of hauls, or 50% of trips, basically. And that was to make sure that we were learning how to use the system and that people that were participating were doing things correctly. And as captains and we got better at that dropped to 35%. And the idea is ultimately what we're striving for is a representative sample that allows us to make estimates of catch that are accurate, because particularly with an ITQ, you don't want 20% error bars around someone's ITQ allocation utilization, because that costs money. So we want to have, precise and accurate data in terms of what was landed by whom and how to allocate that for the ITQ system, but minimize the burden. So if we can get, accurate, precise data with 30% of trips or 33% of trips or a quarter of the trips will have a catch monitor randomly assigned, then that's where we'll end up. But I think initially we need to set the bar a little bit higher so that we can learn what the appropriate number is and work back from there.
Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry for the second or third follow-up here, but that I appreciate that. And I think one of the discussions that came out of the workshop too was that we may learn by area, that we may have a pretty good understanding of, if you're in that area, what a representative trip is going to look like. So that may help too as we move forward.
Jose?
Yeah, the other, and thank you, Mike, for that. But the other thing, again, just keep in mind that there will be a review of the program 1 year after implementation to increase efficiency. So like if we think that something needs to be moved one way or another to increase the accuracy of that information, then that can be done at that point.
Anything else around the table? Sonny?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just I guess, an anecdotal question. How many dealers are there for the ocean, cohog, and surf clam?
Jose?
About 8 dealers, right? 8 dealers or so. I should know this by heart because we use that document every day, but I mean, every year, but it's about 8.
Seeing no more comments around the table. Questions or comments from the audience? Sam?
Good morning. Thanks, everybody, for all the hard work on this. This has been a little bit of a long road for all of us. And everybody has been kind of bending and being flexible in order to get this done. Having that workshop was one of the most important things that we could do to find some commonality in what we have to get through, because we have what used to be a simple fishery is now turning very complex. And we know we're going to have to make some changes. The project in Memphis, we funded, just so you know, it's an $81,000 project just to identify some of these best practices that we need to start to do in the future with this amendment, which comes to, creating pseudo observers and putting them on vessels from Rutgers University and creating and trying to find out what are the best protocols, best practices in the different types of fisheries, different size vessels, different areas, so that we could get our VTR reporting discard rates correct. And then we also funded into doing that in the plant monitoring too, so that we could follow what we would consider a estimate of the mixed catch that is in the cage and follow it all the way to the plant. And then once the plant did its separation, can we put those numbers together, make them jive so that we get confidence in the numbers that are being reported? So that's basically the Memphis project. I wrote up the EFP for the industry, which you have in your packets. And basically that is just an allowance to get these things started as soon as possible. And there'll be a back and forth as to how we do that. Will it be fleet wide? Will it be a subset of the fleet? We don't know that yet. But at the same time, I would say that if your decision is favorable to move forward with this amendment, it's actually going to dictate an EFP, because the service can't even start to figure out those numbers until mixed trips are landed. So I think we're all on the same page. And I just want to say that I appreciate all the hard work by the council and staff. It's been a long couple of years, but we definitely appreciate everything you guys have done. Thank you.
Come on forward.
Thank you. My name is Jeff Pike. I represent Bumblebee Seafoods. I'm a member of the AP and participated in the workshop. Bumblebee is one of the largest ocean quahog quota holders. We only use quahogs. Now, from the beginning of this issue, our main concern has been catch accounting and finding a way for the fishery to operate legally. Under the current rules, boats were not reporting catch and bycatch as they should have because of the two species prohibition. We strongly support the revised alternative, as we believe it will provide the types of information needed to ensure sustainable management of the fishery. A quick word about the workshop. It was very productive and a great way to resolve issues, and the council might consider using that approach with other fishery dilemmas. Especially want to thank the council members who participated, the council staff, the facilitator, Coast Guard, and others. And lastly, just a word about Memphis, the National Science Foundation Center that we are members of. Industry is investing hundreds of thousands of dollars through that center to help support and develop onboard and implant monitoring protocols for bycatch estimates. It funds the research the council's identified in our 5-year research plan as a priority. And it's really a fantastic way for industry to be engaged in the research necessary for sustainable management of our fisheries. We encourage you to support this alternative 5. Thank you.
Any more comments? Sam?
Good morning, everybody. Danny Vivecchio, LaMonica Fine Foods. Firstly, I want to thank everybody for the workshop. I really appreciate what everybody did here. Coast Guard, OLE, everybody who showed up, and thank the government for funding it. But I think a lot of good came out of it. And I really appreciate the fact that we all looked into cost savings for the industry, because had we gone the other way with the original amendment, alternative 5, it would have been devastating to us. Jose's demonstration today, the cost of $1 million. And look, I don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth. You guys did a fantastic job for industry, but every $1 million you add to the cost of the industry is about 4 cents a pound to the price of clam bean. And in the case price, that might be like $1 a case. They're very back of napkin costing. I mean, they're not detailed. But just so you know, that's what it is. We know, industry knows this has to come with a cost. And Mike, I appreciate you realizing that if we can, get the cost down over the next couple of years as we work into this, to get the accurate accounting, that we, appreciate that if we just keep the numbers in mind. I mean, right now, the state of the industry is we're facing Canadian imports on ocean cohogs. These clams are not MSC certified. I know there's not any political authority here to do anything with that right now, but I just wanted you to know what we're looking at, right? What we're facing right now as an industry. And they're coming in mainly to the West Coast. And we have some imports from China, IQF clams that are attacking the surf clam market. And again, they're not MSC certified. And, we're just dealing with those. In some cases, it's $10 to $20 a case cheaper than what we're selling clams out there. So if we all just keep cost in mind, I appreciate that. I know these things are expensive, and we're going to have to spend money to get the clams counted right. But if we just keep in mind the cost of that. And I just had one question, if I could. Are you saying, Jose, that if I don't declare a mixed strip when I go out, they're not going to send a monitor to the plant? Or aren't all dealers going to be subject to monitoring?
Yeah, the way is phrased, the text in the new alternative is that the monitors will only go to the facilities that are declaring a mixed strip, or the facilities that are receiving mixed clams. So if you are only receiving, in your case, ocean quahogs or surf clams only, you will have to obey by the current regulations still. Yes.
Okay, so that means that if I have a non-mixed strip declaration and I bring that to the plant, then I'm just subject to inspection by OLE. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have. I want to thank you again. Merry Christmas. Happy holidays to everybody. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Any further comments? Dan Farnham?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. To that last comment, when it comes to cost recovery, will it be is it assumed that it's going to be across the board, or will cost recovery be different for each ITQ holder based upon whether or not they land a mixed trip or a directed trip for each species?
Jose?
So good question, Dan. Thank you. Given the way the cost recovery system works for ITQ fisheries or limited access privilege fisheries, is that is distributed across all the people participating in the fishery, all the permit holders, or all the people that have not permit holders, IFQ permit holders or ITQ permit holders or allocation. So in this case, this could be done two ways. One of them will be that everybody pays the same share for that increase in cost. Another alternative could be that everybody pays for the increased observer coverage because everyone is subject to that. But for the plant monitoring costs, it is possible that while the service is still administering the program and sending people out to different processing plants, that only the processing plants that the processing plants that are receiving mixed trips, they can pay that, they can contract and pay that directly to the people that are offering the monitoring service. So not everybody will have to pay for that. So that cost will only be incurred by the processing facilities or plants that are receiving mixed trips. Does that answer your question, Dan?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, thank you for that. I just thought it might be a distinction that had to be clarified there. Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Dan?
Yeah, the way we do it now, I think, is by landings. And if we can continue forward that way, I think that would be a good way to continue to do it. Because the bigger companies, they land more clams. They're probably going to be subject to more plant monitoring inspections. I don't catch as many as the two bigger machine shop companies do. I mean, they're going to bear the burden of the expense of this, but spread out over all the pounds, it would be equal for all of us. Try to do it on a plant by plant basis, I think, is going to be, way too complicated. But we can decide that later, maybe as the time goes on. But that's the way we do it now. Whoever lands the dormant ITQ allocation, the unused, we don't get charged for that. We only get charged on what we catch, what we utilize, and then we can at least either pass that cost on to the customer or find a way to absorb it. Thank you.
James Fletcher?
I asked this question at the advisors meeting and I ask it again. I want to clarify. This only applies to the northern surf clam and the northern quahog. It does not apply to the southern species. Is that correct? I want it on the record that is correct. Thank you.
Jose?
Yeah. Yeah, this applies to the fisheries that are managed under the ITQ system.
Peter Hughes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great discussion around the table. I would just like to say that it's too bad we didn't hold this workshop 2 years ago because we might be 2 years ahead of where we are right now. But the workshop was great. There was great attendance by everybody, and I'd just like to thank the council, and I'd like to thank staff. That was such a professionally run workshop. OLE was there, the Coast Guard was there, industry was there. Everybody had input. The moderator, Pat Field, couldn't have been better. I mean, it was a shining example of how all parties of this FMP came together to try and work out the kinks and try to come to a solution and a solution that everybody could live with. But it was a great workshop, and staff staff did an amazing job putting it all together. So thank you.
Seeing no more discussion around the table, Peter, I'm going to call back on you again.
I can make a presentation, but I cannot write a motion. So I need, Mary's going to help me. So just wait a minute there, Peter.
Okay. Move to select revised alternative 5 as described in the staff memo, increased observer coverage and self-reported discards, mixed trip sort at dealer with NOAA catch monitors as the preferred alternative.
Is there a second for the motion? Joe Semino. Any further discussion on the motion? Michelle?
I just want to thank the members of industry who are here for coming up and providing their thoughts and comments on this. I think that's really valuable. In particular, Danny, your comments on the cost recovery. That was one of the questions I had, if you all had thought and considered that. And so appreciate that. And thank you all for making the effort to be here.
Jeff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify when it says with NOAA catch monitors, whether that infers that those are NOAA employees or those NOAA authorized to catch monitors. Thank you.
Jose?
I think that the intention was that they were going to be people that were trained by NOAA and authorized by NOAA to do this job. Do you think that's correct, Potts? Yeah.
Mike Benning? Either one, or you can go to your new point.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I think you're right. I think we would treat it. I work with John Hare in the Science Center that would likely be setting up that program. And I expect it would be, you know, a contract vehicle that we would use, and we would train and certify catch monitors to participate in this program. My comment on the motion I think is fine, but the text in the document that's referred to in the staff memo on, I guess it's page 3 of the document, the first full paragraph says, the NEFOP observer coverage will be increased in year 1 from current levels to cover 5% of all clam dredge fishing trips. And I want to be that, you can't say that. Because that's two things. That's a change to the SBRM program that is, you know, multi-FMP wide. And so as a single council, single action amendment, this can't change the underlying SBRM, but also the council can't obligate the agency to fund observers at a certain level without authorization and appropriations. So I would just encourage, when the document ultimately is submitted for review, that sentence be modified something along the lines of, you know, the council encourages or, you know, requests that the agency increase observer coverage up to 5% in order to, you know, you get what I'm saying. That way it's not a requirement. What I'm trying to avoid is that the increase to 5% becomes a requirement for approval of for the amendment, because then that would be an issue. Thanks.
Dan? Peter?
I think that's page 10 in your report.
Yeah.
In the overall report.
Oh, it's on page 2 of the staff document. So the motion is there. Is the specific motion is the one that is in parentheses. I mean, the specific text to the alternative is the text that is in parentheses. That's what the new alternative 5 will read.
Michelle?
But Jose, I think, so looking at, as Peter said, at page 10 on the workshop report that you reviewed in your presentation, where it has the side-by-side comparison of, you know, the current alternative 5 text versus the draft alternative text. It's that draft alternative text that you would then drop into the amendment, correct?
Yeah, yeah, all that information will be part of that alternative that is there in parentheses. Yeah.
With the
So,
modification as suggested.
Of course, yeah, of course, yeah. Correct. Thank you.
Michael Leasing.
Sorry, Chris just threatened me. I just, for purposes of clarifying a point of order, I just wanted to make it for those people who are following along, and I think everyone following this is probably in this room. There was a motion in June to select alternative 5, which then was postponed until this meeting. Instead of bringing that postponed motion back to the floor because it no longer was in order because the alternative 5 was revised, it no longer served as a, in order for the purposes of today, which is why we started fresh. And John could maybe state that in a more logical and well thought out way, but I just wanted to make sure. I was expecting that we would bring up the previous motion, but we're not, and John explained why. Thanks.
John Almeida.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just procedurally, if you recall that the motion that Mike's referring to was a motion to substitute, and the motion that it would substitute with no longer was voted down. So we have a motion to substitute with nothing to substitute it with. So it's procedurally out of order at this point. So we just started with a fresh slate at this meeting. Thank you.
John here.
Yeah, I just want to go back to the earlier point. Is there interest in changing or amending, I don't know what the right word is, to NOAA authorized catch monitors for clarity, or is the council okay with the current language?
Yeah, it's everybody. Peter, you okay with and Joe, you're okay with the rewording? Peter?
I don't necessarily know that it needs reworded unless Mike Penny thinks it needs reworded. I think that, there's similar programs in the scallop fishery where there's authorized people that are authorized by NOAA to do all the, observers. There's multiple companies out there that NOAA has authorized to do that. So, we could put the word authorized in there if you think let's go ahead and put authorized in there. Thanks, John.
Yeah, if you can add that, Mayor, I think that way it takes all the guesswork out of it.
NOAA authorized catch, but there you go. Good.
Any further discussion? Let's see if we can do this easy. Is there any opposition to the motion? Any abstentions to the motion? Seeing none, the motion passes unanimously. Yay. We all got a Christmas gift. Yeah, Peter, you have another motion?
I do. Need to send it to the agency. Move to submit the amendment to NOAA Fisheries.
Second by Mike Louisi. I don't think we need any discussion on the motion, but is there any? Is there any objection to the motion? Any abstention to the motion? One abstention? Noah? Garfo? With that, the motion passes. Thank you guys very much. Mike Penny.
Yeah, I appreciate all the work that went into developing this over the years and the attention and participation of the industry at the workshop. I think that was, as has been said, a really important step in the development of this, getting us to a place where we are today. As we discussed, this is going to take some time to figure out some of the details and what the program will actually look like. And I expect that we'll be planning to come back before the council to give updates and hopefully get that on the agenda so the industry is aware and can participate. I also look forward to working with the industry on the EFP. I think that's something that will help us bridge the time between now and when we can actually get the program fully implemented. I think it will also provide some very useful information for filling in some of those details. But just want people to be aware. This is going to be a time-consuming process over the next couple of years, but ultimately, I think it's in everybody's interest to move forward as we've discussed today. Thanks.
Michelle?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just one more quick thing before we leave this topic. I mean, given that this whole issue has been precipitated by the impacts of climate change on the distribution of surf clams, because Mike, I don't know, and I'm just spitballing here, and maybe I already mentioned this at a previous meeting and I'm having a senior moment, but is there any opportunity, I'm just thinking about some of the technical follow-up with respect to modification of the catch accounting system. Is there any option for IRA funds to be put towards that, given that this is kind of a climate change driven thing? Do you have any sense of that other funding pots that could help offset some of those costs, I guess, is what I'm asking about, that are related to some of the climate change resources that the agency's been given?
I mean, possibly, but I'm not aware of a way to do that right now.
All right, with that, let's take a 15-minute break. We'll come back at 10:55, and we're going to jump into the afternoon agenda item and get a little head start. Welcome back, everyone. We're going to take the first afternoon agenda item and put it on this morning's. Let's do the 2025 to 2029 council research priorities. We're going to review and approve the draft research priorities document. Brandon, whenever you're ready.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. As we indicated, I have a draft comprehensive research priorities document for your review today, and hopefully at the end of this, you'll approve it for implementation for next year. So just a slide on some background in regards to the development of the research priorities document. So in the 2006 reauthorization of the Magnuson Act, it required each of the councils to develop research priorities, and it specifies that they should address fisheries interactions, habitat, and other areas necessary for management purposes. So that's the sort of broad focus that Magnuson lays out in regards to what the research priorities should look like. And the documents then get submitted to regional office and the science center, and they are intended to provide priority and budget considerations by each regional science center. So the Northeast Science Center has both our research priorities to consider and the New England Council research priorities to consider as they think about their priorities as well. Magnuson also specifies that our priorities should be developed in consultation with our SSC, and they should be providing input on what those research priorities should look like. And you'll see throughout the document where the SSC has provided their input on this plan. So the first one was created in 2008, and that was essentially just a laundry list of recommendations that come out of the stock assessments. And so there was really no sort of formal process to develop that document. It was just, let's take all of those priorities that come out of the stock assessments. Those seemed like a good priority for us, and that was the first plan. The second plan, which was approved by the council in 2015, which was a full 5 years, 2016 to 2020, was really informed by a lot of activities that the council was taking at the time, the visioning project, thinking about how the council was going to move forward with management, the development of the council's first strategic plan back in 2014. So a lot of that information helped really refine and create a new type of research priorities document for the council. It included for the first time these key research themes and elements that are still getting carried on through the research priorities document today. And there was some prioritization that took place in regards to the species-specific research priorities that are included. Then our current document, the 2020-2024 document, it had retained a lot of those original research priority themes, but we had changed a lot of how we would develop the document, how we would track the document, monitor sort of its implementation. We also reorganized and reprioritized how we would develop the species-specific priorities. And we had, you'll notice there, the last two documents, there's an overlap of 2020. So we moved up the current research priorities document to make sure it was implemented in 2020 to align with our strategic plan. And you'll see that going forward, and with our cooperative agreement, so that all of the council's sort of planning documents were all tied together and aligned and working off of each other. And so the development of the draft document that you have for you today really builds off of the framework and the process that we use for the current document. Like I said, that's where the big focus in the development of the current document really sort of focused on was on this process for how we would develop the document and monitor the implementation of the document. And so a lot of work had already been done. And so I didn't see the need to really reinvent the wheel on this one. It was just building off of what we've already sort of how things have grown and developed over time. But I did include a red line version of the document for the council to see so that you can see all of the changes that were made to the document. And it really reflects some of the lessons that we've learned over the last 5 years and how we can tweak things, particularly in regards to monitoring the development and implementation of the document. And it's been updated, obviously, to include the latest information, to reflect our current issues and the council's needs. And so the document really solicits input throughout the year, and it's part of our spec setting process or our spec review process. So we start with the APs. Each of the staff leads, when they are developing the fishery performance report with the advisory panel, they ask them about research priorities. So we get input from the AP during that discussion. When the SSE is making their ABC recommendations or reviewing them, they are also providing research priorities. That information goes to the monitoring committee for their input on potential research priorities. This year, as we're developing it, it went back to the SSE. And so in September, I presented a draft plan to the SSE, and they provided additional feedback, more on the sort of research priority themes and the overall implementation of the document. So we take all of that information. I work with the staff lead, the council staff lead, and we work with the Science Center, the assessment lead, and sort of take all of those pieces of information and start to develop what the actual priorities might look like. So in addition to those lists and all of that information, I'm also looking at a number of other areas to help inform the priorities document. As I had indicated, we shifted the current document to align with our strategic plan. So you all approved the latest strategic plan back in October. And as Mary was creating that document, she and I talked about making sure the strategic plan and the research priorities work together, and we're sort of referencing what's going on in the strategic plan in our research priorities and vice versa. So you'll see a lot of objectives and strategies identified in the science and ecosystem themes are carried out there, and you'll find a lot of them implemented here within our research priorities. So there is that connection between our strategic plan and our research priorities. And we also looked at a lot of other and considered a lot of other strategic planning and research documents that the council has and that our regional partners have. And I won't go through the entire list there, but we're looking at a host of materials to help inform what our priorities might be. As part of the development of the current priorities document, the SSC had recommended that and had questioned, how does the council and how does the Science Center actually use the research priorities document that you all put together? And so they had suggested that we conduct a review of the research priorities to, sort of investigate how the priorities there are actually being implemented and being utilized by both the council and the Science Center. And so that was really helpful to identify strategies and changes in terms of how we may want to move forward with a revised document, and things that I'm thinking about for the future and thinking about what we want to do for the research priorities to make sure we're understanding why particular priorities may or may not have been addressed going forward. So taking a step back and reviewing the document to make sure that we're moving forward appropriately, I think has been really helpful. And so I did a review of the current document, and the first thing I did was just look at how the council and how council staff may be utilizing the document. So I looked at the council supported 23 projects over the last 5 years. Actually, there are more projects than that, but these are projects that are sort of focused on research and management needs. And so 23 of those projects, they covered all 6 fishery management plans. They covered 8 specific species. And all of the projects that the council supported addressed at least one of our broad research priority themes. And I'll get into those in a few slides from now. And most of them covered 2 or more of our priority themes. Of those priority themes, stock assessment improvements and climate impacts to productivity and stock distribution were the most common that these projects helped support. And 16 of those 23 projects helped address 20 specific research priorities in our current document. So 19% of all of our priorities were supported by council-funded projects over the last 5 years. I think that's pretty impressive. 75% of those projects helped inform or will be likely to inform a management action or stock assessment. So there's a lot of value and direct application in terms of the projects that the council is supporting are getting fed right into the management or stock assessment process. Some of those it's hard to exactly know yet because some of the projects that we are supporting are still ongoing. So the potential application of some of those is a little bit unknown. So that 75% may actually be a little low. How the Science Center and Garfo may be using the implementation plan, I don't have a direct way to sort of analyze that the way I do with council supported projects. But so I looked at the the priorities and strategic plan that the Northeast region, that Garfo and the Science Center put together. And I would just say that many of their priorities align with the priorities that you'll see in our document. So I think there's a lot of synergy between what we're thinking about and where Garfo and the Science Center are thinking about over the next 5 years. And I would say that the new stock assessment process, I guess it's not so new anymore, it's 5 years old, but the stock assessment process that we do have in place now really takes into consideration the council research priorities. So the stock assessment lead and the working groups tasked with looking at developing our research track stock assessments look at our research priorities. And as part of the terms of reference, they respond to whether or not a research priority was addressed or not, and why it was addressed or not. So, we're getting a lot of information, and the Science Center and the stock assessment process are really now integrating our research priorities into the stock assessment process, much more so than they used to in the past. And so we have 7 research priority themes. These have sort of expanded and been modified over time. Like I said, these started in the 2016 and to 2020 research priorities document. The current document added a couple of research priorities and that research priority themes, and I don't plan to go into each one of these. I'm only suggesting one slight modification to the language to the actual priority theme. That's in collect ecosystem data and development of ecosystem tools and management strategies to support EAFM and climate ready initiatives. After reading through a lot of our planning documents for the region and where the council has been headed and our IRA projects that we have, there's a big focus on climate ready fisheries, climate ready management, and a lot of the tools and strategies that we use within our EAFM process also support climate ready fisheries. And so I think that's going to be a big focus of ours over the next 5 years. So suggested a slight tweak to expand that particular research priority theme. So while I'm not suggesting any changes to the priority themes themselves, all of the supporting information under each of those has been edited and changed quite a bit to reflect sort of our current issues and what the council has done over the last 5 years to support all of these. The SSC was supportive of all 7 of these research priority themes as well. They recognize that a lot has been done to advance all of these, but we still have a lot of work to do on all 7 of them as well. So next is just stepping through how we develop the species specific priorities. Again, as I mentioned, it's part of the specs review process. So it's already sort of integrated into our system in terms of developing research priorities. And then looking at all of those other documents and feedback that we've received. So it's not just taking all of those long lists and shoving them into the research priorities document. We're not taking everything that the SSC may recommend in terms of research priorities or everything that a stock assessment peer review may say, but trying to pull out those that are most critical and highest priority for the council to consider. In many cases, the SSC is providing recommendations that are very specific to the stock assessment that really it's only germane to the stock assessment lead in some cases. So we're not looking to provide all of those here in this report. We're following a very similar organizational structure in terms of how we put these together to really make sure that we're thinking through the research priorities to make them more tactical and strategic in terms of how we think about implementing and carrying out the different research priorities that we have. So we have these short-term, smaller scale and long-term, larger scale. By scale, I'm not referencing geographic scale here. a short-term smaller scale couldn't cover the entire coast for bluefish, for example. But it's a project that may be, you just need 1 year's worth of data collection on a very specific issue to address something within the stock assessments, for example. So it's something very targeted that we could address relatively quickly, and it answers a specific question versus something that's longer term, larger scale, that may take several years to work on. It's a really big and challenging, complex issue that you're working through. And so that's how we've identified these two different categories. And then the list that's underneath each of those categories is prioritized. So it's prioritized by species and by those categories that we have there. We also put together in the last priorities document, we carried it over here. We have these general cross-species priorities. So those are things that may be germane across all of our fishery management plans, surveys, and different things, socioeconomic information. And so we've expanded on that list. And then we've also made sure that we connected each of our species-specific priorities to those 7 broad priority themes. We want to make sure that we're still making advances, that all of our individual priorities support those broader priority themes. And so I don't think it was, we were required to do it under this go round, but I followed a very similar process and documentation to the way we did a 2021, and I put biennial review because it was the only review we did. We didn't do a biennial review of our last research priorities, but we did a really comprehensive way of trying to understand how we were changing species-specific priorities. And I thought it was a good way to track and understand how our priorities from the current document may get transferred or not into the next research priorities document. So I went through a similar sort of process of identifying new priorities, which ones we are deleting, any modifications if we're keeping a priority, but we wanted to modify the text to be more specific or address a change in the priority, or if we're retaining a priority, if something should move up in priority order. And I also wanted to highlight any of the priorities that were either work has been done, work's in progress, or we're trying to address a specific priority. I thought it's helpful to see which priorities we're actually making some progress on in general. And so you'll see, again, I have a red line version, and all of those sort of modifications are in your briefing book so that you can see the changes we're proposing from the current document to the new one. There's a lot of strike throughs and deleting existing priorities. And in general, I would say most of those are associated with stocks that went through a research track assessment over the last 5 years. And we're fortunate in the Mid-Atlantic, a number of our stocks have gone through a research track stock assessment recently, or they're on the schedule now. So there's some things that have either already been addressed by the working groups, such as longfin squid and scup, or new priorities have been identified as part of that research track process. So in general, a lot of the work and advances that we're making are associated with the research track process. And so you take, and this is just an example, I don't plan to go through all 103 research priorities that we've identified, but this is just an example for golden tilefish. It is one of our species that we that did go through our research track stock assessment. And so you'll see lots of changes. All of the different changes that you could potentially have are associated with golden tilefish. We have a bunch that are crossed out because they were addressed through the research track stock assessment or some other activity that addressed a particular priority. We've added a bunch of new priorities, mostly things that came out of the research track peer review. We're shifting priority order. We're editing some of the current text. So you'll see that's the red line version there on the left-hand side, which translates then into a new research priorities list, which is there on your right-hand side. So that's what we did for all of our species and the broad categories. That just gives you a sense of how the marked up version translated into a clean version that you have for your review today. And so just thinking about where the research priorities document goes here and into the future, I think we've made a lot of positive progress on our priorities document. Maybe I'm biased because I think about it more so than most in regards to how we're advancing our research priorities. But I think the process that we established in the current document and hopefully plan to carry over for this, I think has been really beneficial. As I had shown during the review, a lot of the priorities that the council has supported are directly related to what's in our priorities document. So we are planning for a mid-cycle review instead of these biennial review that I had proposed the last time. That's probably too frequent, but I do think a check-in at some point during the 5 years is probably really important to do. You're not revising the entire document during that review. It's really very focused on the species specific priorities. If something has been addressed or if something new has come up, I think it's worth making sure that our priorities are reflective of that so that someone isn't working on something that we've already addressed, or, if something new comes up that, there's a researcher out there that might be interested in supporting that. So, I think the review that we did in 2021 was found to be really positive, and I think doing that again is a good step forward to retain. Again, the broad research priority themes, we would not change. It would be very focused on the species specific priorities. And then just thinking about the longer term, I still think there's value in developing a research priorities plan, right? We put together a list of priorities, but thinking through how we actually move forward with implementing and carrying out those priorities, I think is necessary for a number of reasons. One, just to make sure that it's, that what we put together and spend time on here is actually being accomplished, making sure that the center, we're working collaboratively with the center on those priorities, particularly since they are trying to serve many folks, the New England Council, and I would say research priorities out of the commission as well. And so thinking through and maybe a comprehensive look at all of the research priorities in the region might be one thing we might want to consider. I think it could help find some of those research priorities that are in common across both the councils and the commission, which could help with some communication and coordination and leveraging resources for some of those common research priorities. So I think that's a good way to go. There's a lot of ways I think we could leverage that now that maybe we wouldn't in the past through the NRCC process and through the East Coast Climate Coordination Group. There's a lot of coordination, more and more coordination happening between the councils. And I think because of that coordination now, I think it sets us up well that we could begin to coordinate a little bit more on research priorities as well. And so both of these short-term and long-term activities that we're proposing here you'll find in the strategic plan, again, linking, what we're thinking strategically through that plan and what we hope to do within the research priorities, making sure that those move forward together is really important. And so today, just looking for your feedback on the draft document. I do have, if we need to, I have backup slides that get into the species specific priorities if there are questions about any of them. But if you have any feedback on the overall content within the document, how it's laid out, I'm happy to take any of that feedback. And then we're looking for you all to approve the document today for implementation in 2025. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much, Brandon. And I don't even have to look. Michelle Duvall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Brandon, thank you for the great presentation. I know it is not an insignificant undertaking to go through and review all of these other, regional planning documents and to try to, coordinate the council's research priorities across all these different things. So thank you very much for, all of that effort. I did just have a couple questions. One is under black sea bass, the longer term, larger scale edition of evaluate the stock structure spatial overlap of black sea bass between the mid and South Atlantic. And so I was just curious if you've had any conversation with Chip and folks in the South Atlantic because I know that it looks like on the CDAR schedule, there's a potential request for another black sea bass assessment in 2027. So just want to make sure that there's some coordination on that. And then I have another question after that.
Yeah, no, thanks, Michelle. That was one of the reasons we put that in there. John and I had lunch back in August and started talking about black sea bass. After the black sea bass presentation to the council, John and I started talking about the South Atlantic component of black sea bass and having some discussions about sort of climate impacts or the poor recruitment that they're seeing in the South Atlantic. Well, maybe that's because maybe some of those recruits are moving into the north. So some investigation into that. And then I talked to Chip, and they're actually doing some genetics work on South Atlantic stock so that we can get a sense if there is some mixing between the two regions and if it's one unit stock or not. So so we're beginning to investigate that. So we've talked about maybe there's an opportunity to do some synergies between the two assessments, and maybe we just thinking more broadly, not saying it's a definite, but maybe there's value in a coastwide black sea bass stock assessment depending upon what we find from the genetics work.
Thank you for that. And I think collusion is good on this this particular topic. And, just thinking about all the impacts of climate change and how, they've affected this species in particular. And then the other question I had was under surf clam, it's item number 106, and that's evaluate the costs and benefits of different technological methods, HEBCAM, EM/AI for measuring surf clam abundance and habitat, including clam density. And so that's not a new one. It wasn't altered, but I was just curious if also you took a walk through some of the SCEMFIS projects that have been funded, or if you reach out to SCEMFIS as part of that, because, and I'm just looking to the back of the room here, I see Sam, but I think perhaps some of the most recently funded projects might have included something along these lines. So I think just, encouraging maybe, a look through those projects or outreach to, I think last name escaping me right now. Oh my gosh. So sorry, Jeff. Kaylin, thank you. Oh my God, serious senior moment. Is chair of the industry advisory board right now. So maybe just, reaching out to whomever is chair to get a sense of those projects. And then I am fully supportive of not just a list of priorities, but also trying to have a plan for how best to address those comprehensively. I know it's not going to be an easy undertaking, but I think it'd be a worthwhile exercise. And I'll shut up. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thanks, Michelle. I would say that I did not explicitly look at what SCEMFIS has funded recently or what's sort of on the docket, but you'll notice under 101 there that there's two little hashtags at the end of it indicating that I do know that there is ongoing work in relationships to that particular research priority. One of them that I was explicitly thinking about is one that Jessica has been involved with Dan Hennon, that they do have cameras on the survey itself to do some of this. Dan got some funds a couple of years ago to begin some of this work on the dredge survey. But yeah, so I do know that there is work ongoing on this, but we're not ready yet, I don't think, to cross it off. So that's why Jessica thought it was still important to keep it on there, but just flag that there is some ongoing work taking place. Yeah.
Any more discussion around the table? Any questions for Brandon? Everybody like what they see? I believe we have a motion. If somebody would like to make that. Michelle?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to approve the 5-year 2025 to 2029 research priorities document. We didn't modify it, so yes.
Seconded by Joe Chris. Any further discussion on the motion? Any opposition to the motion? Any abstentions to the motion? Seeing none, Brandon, thank you very much. Oh, and the motion was approved by unanimous consent. Thank you. I must be getting hungry. Looks like we're going to have another long lunch. So come back at 1 o'clock. Let's come back at 1 o'clock and we'll do the 2025 implementation plan. And I'll see everybody then.
Yes.
Oh, forgot one thing. Yes, good.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Shelley, for reminding me. If you are interested in prepaying for the hospitality event tonight, see Shelley before you go. Thank you.